defending your family in a toxic world. So he's got plenty to talk about. He's the medical director of the Stockton family practice in Stockton, New Jersey, which is a lovely little town on the northwest border of New Jersey, facing the Delaware River. It's very different from here. It's kind of rolling and lots of trees. He's also a coordinating director of the Stockton Center for Healthcare, sitting member of the Autism Research Institute think tank, a diplomat of the American Board of Family Practice with certification in basic proficiency in chelation therapy. He has a certificate of training in oxidative medicine and hyperbaric medicine. He is an assistant professor of UMDNJ. For those of you who aren't in New Jersey, that's the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, located in a number of places, but the main campus is in Newark. And last and most important from my perspective, he is a member of the IAOMT and on the IAOMT Biological Support Committee. So let's welcome Dr. Freedenfeld and give him a hand. Thank you. It's still on. Let me turn it off.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's see if I can do this without tripping. Well, I got to say, this is certainly an honor to be asked to speak before this group. I have been a proud member. I guess I'm an MD, so I'm not as full a member as everybody else here is. But I've been a proud member of this organization for a long time, and I really value the stuff that you guys have been doing. And yeah, I don't need to talk about the dangers of mercury, amalgams, root canals to this group. But I think that if we are interested in toxicity and in helping our families, our patients, become healthier in general, then we need to expand what we're thinking and not just focus on the one area, the dental amalgams or vaccines or small areas, but really get a handle on what's going on in our environment. And I'm not talking about what's going on from the factories and the spillways, but really what's going on in our homes, our schools, our offices. And if we can get a handle on that, then we can do a huge job in decreasing the toxic exposure that we have become a part of. Good, this is working. So the basic concept that I work with is that many of today's common diseases are really expressions of the toxic effects from environmental toxins on our body, whether it's our GI, our cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, neurologic, immune systems. They're all interconnected, and they're all being damaged by a lot of these toxins. And they're being expressed more prominently in different individuals for different reasons. One person might become have more exposures. Another person may have more difficulty in relieving toxins from their body or be more susceptible to the toxic effect because of some genetic variations, and we'll look at that. They may be more susceptible because they are ill, they have infections, they are malnourished, and this country is the most malnourished country on the planet. Right? You think about what we're eating, we are eating the least nutritious food of any other country in the world. So I try to conceptualize how I look at the body and with regard to toxins. And there are various aspects. Part of it is how much toxins we're exposed to. What's the toxic burden from our environment? Are we spending our days working in the Lincoln Tunnel? Do we live on a pristine mountaintop? What are we breathing? What are we eating? And how much does that available toxin have access to our body? Now, the outside world has access to our body through our skin, through our lungs, and through our GI tract. And the lungs, they do pretty good. There's not a whole lot of leaky lung syndromes that we say. People with skin damage, eczema, psoriasis, may have a lot more leakiness through their skin, but the gut is a huge conduit through which the outside world travels from stem to stern. And a large part of our immune system, 80% of our lymphocytes, line the gut really for the purpose of keeping the outside world out. If this leaks in, we're going to start dealing with it. So how leaky is that gut? And the leakiness occurs between the cells, the lining cells of the GI tract, which are held together by a cement, basically, these desmosome bonds. And various things, like nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, will break those bonds, make them, cells come apart, spaces where the toxins can leak in. And then what is the body component? These DNA polymorphisms, or what we call SNPs, variations in the type of genes that are present in our body. These are not good genes or bad genes. These are variations in how a gene might produce a protein, whether it's an enzyme or some glutathione or a transport molecule. And we have variations. And that's very important as part of our evolution. So species evolve and stay when the environment changes because they've got a polymorphism that makes them more genetically susceptible or more genetically able to withstand that environmental change. If you don't have that ability, you die out and you become an extinct species. Or members of a species may have some polymorphisms that enable them to continue the species. And genes that have a value are going to be present in today. So there was a gene some time back that enabled the humanoids that were moving out of Africa to sustain the long winters with less food. It made them better able to extract energy and store it, basically put on fat to get through the winter months. You take that same genetic polymorphism and put it into the land of good and plenty, and we get insulin resistance syndrome with diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, and all the stuff that we're seeing. That's what happens as the environment changes. So we've got these polymorphisms, and then we also have the effect of the toxic damage that may occur within our cellular matrix or within our genes. There is something called epigenetic phenomenon. We have our DNA that we're born with, this series of genes. Well, genes are either turned on or turned off. And the way we become what we are from that fertilized egg, we split off and become placenta and body and bone and muscle, is by turning off genes in a particular sequence. We methylate the gene, turns it off, it folds it up, it closes that gene, and it no longer expresses protein, so the cells change. Well, there are things in our environment, we'll see some of them as I go through the talk, that actually cause those epigenetic changes in the genes. They're actually turning off our genes. Then mitochondriopathies, the mitochondria, the energy factories, they are very susceptible to toxic damage. Hormone disruptors, there's a lot of these in the environment that we had some for lunch today from the plastics that we were eating. Cellular toxicity, are they affecting the cellular mechanisms inside the body and causing oxidative stress, which actually changes the way we're able to detoxify. And then the output side of it. Well, if we don't have the ability to, for our livers or kidneys to excrete toxins, then they tend to back up in our bodies. If the gut is leaky, we tend to reabsorb toxins we're trying to get rid of. And if we have impaired detoxification pathways, especially glutathione, but also superoxide dismutases, different pathways, then we're going to have more toxic damage and less ability to get rid of it. So the US EPA is telling us that there's at least 87,000 chemicals currently in widespread use in our environment. Those chemicals, at least 62,000 of them, are small enough to cross cell membranes. They can easy access into our bodies. And many of them are produced in tons at a year, hundreds of tons, many of them. I'm going to talk a bit about autism as an example. I could just as easily use cardiovascular disease or Parkinson's, cancer, any number of diseases, but just want to pick one disease to give you some idea that there is strong literature that tells us that there is a correlation between our environmental exposures and what we're seeing in our patients. So if we look at autism, there are studies that shows the frequency with which we diagnose autism varies directly with the amount of environmental toxins which the kid is exposed to. Go to different areas where there's more toxic exposure, and you can quantify how much they are being exposed. Within that area, we can see a significant odds ratio difference in those kids. Also, how close they are to pesticide spraying in farm countries, especially in farm counties. The closer the kids live to fields that are sprayed with pesticides, the more pesticides that are sprayed within those fields varies directly with the frequency that we're diagnosing autism. And the same would go for Parkinson's and any number of diseases. In 1976, Congress passed the Toxic Substances Control Act with the hope of getting a handle on all these toxins in our environment. Notice, we're realizing there's so much going on, there's so much being spewed into our environment, we've got to do something about it. And so they did what they're supposed to do. They passed this Control Act, but they grandfathered in everything that already existed. So of the 62,000 chemicals that were present in 1976, all of those got grandfathered in. They were fine, and we go from there. They did require some of them to be tested. About 200 have now been tested for safety. So we should feel good about that, right? Here's a quote. The EPA is working with weak laws. Basic research at the agency is often seriously underfunded. That sounds like some tree hugger out there, some radical saying that. But who was this? Was Eric Olson, the director of consumer product safety at Pew Charitable Trust, a former lawyer for the EPA. Another quote, the way the EPA tests chemicals can vastly underestimate risks. And the way they test chemicals is testing them one at a time, often in adult males. They may not test it, or in adult male rats. They may not test it in females or in young or in pregnant animals. And they will test them one at a time. And there is a huge overlap when one chemical may cause a problem with the liver's ability to detoxify something. Another chemical may increase the toxicity of the first chemical, and a third chemical may increase the cellular damage caused by that toxicity. So we get this huge overlap that is not just additive, but it is magnified dramatically. And when we test, we're only testing one and not the combination. So who gave us that quote? Well, this was also Professor Corey Slechta of the EPA's advisory committee. When the CDC conducts tests, and every few years, they actually came out with a newer test than this December 06, but I have to update my slides, I'm sorry. But back then, they were testing for 148 different chemicals, and they found an average of 116 of those in bodies of men, women, and children. And these included things like dioxin, the pesticides, the polycyclic hydrocarbons that we'll talk about. And further studies revealed these same things were in the placenta, umbilical cord, and breast milk body fat of the newborn babies. Really serious stuff. Just a couple of years ago, the USDA eliminated the only federally funded program that tracks the amount of pesticides that's being sprayed. Up until then, we were able to track it and identify by farm area, by location, how much pesticide was being sprayed in this county, in this area. And that was all able to be mapped, and we can identify the frequency of diseases associated with the spraying. Now, under a previous administration and cutting funds back, they decided to bash that, and they actually destroyed all the information so nobody can even go back and get it later on. So relying on safety nets may be dangerous, and we have to learn how to take care of our own life and our own environment, our own homes, our own families. Because, like this fellow realizes, if you rely on his parachute, he's gently dripping down into the river with a waiting crocodile. This is from a series of slides. It was the last picture I ever took. There was a scientific consensus. Something's happening. Oh, I'm going to take a break because I was threatened with bodily harm if I did not read this disclaimer. I do not have any financial interest in any product that I'm about to talk about, any company offering grant monies for this continuing dental or medical education program. In fact, if you look at my tax returns, you'll probably suggest that I have no financial interest in anything. So this was a consensus statement by some experts around the world. They were looking at the causes of learning disabilities and developmental disabilities, and they were saying that the environmental agents that we are confident cause learning developmental disabilities in humans include alcohol, lead, mercury, PCBs, PDBEs, and you will know what these are by the end of the talk, manganese, arsenic, solvents, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, pesticides, nicotine. These are ones we're confident on, that we know these. Another group, this was a group of environmental experts from around the world headed by Philip Grandin from Harvard. And they came to a consensus statement that talked about first the developing brain, the newborn brain, goes through a number of complex steps that needs to be sequenced in a proper fashion at a very proper timing, and that anything that interferes with that timing or that sequencing will have permanent harm, permanent damage. So they were looking at the causes of these potential damages, and noting that even mild changes, mild abnormalities, not enough to cause mental retardation, would cause significant damage. And if we knock 10 points off of an IQ, we really change what somebody's employment ability is. And they were also saying that each neurotoxic contaminant may perhaps cause only a negligible effect, but the combination of several toxic chemicals, along with other adverse effects such as maternal stress. Now maternal stress is huge in our environment today. Everybody, the two working families, we're under pressure for all kinds of things. Decreased thyroid function. And we're going to talk about how many of these agents that we are exposing ourselves to in a very daily fashion in our homes affect thyroid function. We don't pick up on that. And that these things, these combined with maternal stress, thyroid function disruptors, other endocrine disruptors, are going to have rather significant effects. The Environmental Working Group did this beautiful study looking at 10 babies from 10 different hospitals, randomly chosen in 2004. They looked at 413 different chemicals. Right? Out of 87,000, you've got to pick some. It costs them about $100,000 a kid to do the testing. They looked at the prevalence of these 413 chemicals. And they found an average of 200 in the babies. 287 in total were found, average of 200 each kid. And of those, 180 were known to cause cancer, 217 were toxic to the brain and nervous system, 208 caused birth defects. Now this is in the babies, right, in the cord blood. So where do these substances come from? Now we're going to talk about a number of different areas. I'm going to start with plastics and the plastic byproducts as our first start, because it is just a huge part of our life. Phthalates are substances that are used to soften plastic. A lot of you are old enough to remember the model airplanes and model boats that we had when we were kids. These were hard plastic. You glued them together, and if you bent it too much, it would snap and break. Someone found that if we put these substances into that plastic, it became more pliable, so we could use it for baby bottles and baby nipples and stuff. And we use it to soften plastic, to make it more pliable. And a lot of all those plastic toys that the kids are chewing on are containing these phthalates. It's in your nail polish, in your hairspray. It also holds scent in place, so it's added to perfumes, a lot of our cosmetics. Even the new cars, they put the phthalates into the plastic so it holds that new car smell longer. Well, it's there. What does it do? Well, they're known hormone disruptors. We know they cause sperm and genital problems. That hypospadias, how many, when I give a talk in front of an audience of autistic parents, I often ask them how many people have kids with hypospadias, where the urethra comes out short on the penis, doesn't come out the end. And that is caused by hormone disruptors like phthalates, very common. And it's a very high percentage. The kids who are more susceptible to these toxins. It also affects the type of activity. It affects them emotionally. So there was a study that showed the boys that were exposed to phthalates had reduced masculine type play. It affects an intracellular system called peroxisome proliferators. It affects the way fatty acids are oxidized in the body. It affects the way DNA is damaged. It inhibits mitochondrial activities, and it causes inflammation, oxidative stress. Those recycle symbols that we've seen, we've learned, and most of us realize that, think that the 1 and 2 just means that that's the ones that gets picked up at curbside. They all have meaning. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all contain phthalates by nature. 1 and 2 is what's in those soft plastic bottles that we use for our water bottles, the things that we pick up in the grocery store. V is polyvinyl chloride. That's present in your saran wrap, in your flooring, the linoleums. 4 and 5 is more the hard plastic containers. 5, polypropylene, is what our straws are made out of. So when we're giving our kids that juice box, which often has a plastic liner inside of it, we give it to them with that polypropylene straw for them to chew on, and they just gum up on that thing. These kids are getting, our children are getting a huge amount of phthalate exposure that we never had. It's much bigger than we've ever seen. Right? So all of the ones in the first 5 of those recycle triangles contain phthalates, as well as the V, the 3, that has polyvinyl chloride. This is such a everyone knows polyvinyl chloride causes cancer. We should never be exposed to that. But that's what's in our cling wrap. I actually was going to get very upset with the company until I realized that when you read the label on your saran wrap, it says, "Do not let this get in touch with your food." You're supposed to keep an inch between your food and the saran wrap. All right, it's also in a lot of the jars, and we mentioned the peanut butter and cooking oil. So anything that has an oil base is going to absorb these petrochemical byproducts much more readily and concentrate them. This was a study that showed the frequency of autism was directly correlated to the frequency of polyvinyl chloride exposure in mothers' bedrooms during her pregnancy. Styrofoam is actually a plastic. It's a polymer of styrene. Styrene is made from benzene. Benzene is a known carcinogen. Anytime you make a polymer, there will be monomers remaining behind. So the argument that all of your polystyrene is polymerized is garbage. There are styrene monomers found in 100% of urine samples across the country. Styrene is a known hormone mimetic. It acts on the estrogen binding site, probably the thyroid binding site as well. It's certainly neurotoxic. And like many of these substances, the absorption into the fluid and into our body is increased by higher fat content of food, right, by alcohol or lemon juice, and by heat. So what did we have our coffee in for lunch today? It was a styrofoam cup. If you put milk into it, you're going to increase the absorption. If you had tea and put lemon juice into it, you're going to increase the absorption. And that cap that you usually get when you go to the store and that puts that on, right? That's also polystyrene for the most part. Most of those are also from that same group, which is the label, the number 6 in the triangle. It also affects a lot of these oxidative response activity. It affects NF-kappa B activation. It is certainly toxic to the liver. It stresses the ability to produce glutathione, and it's been shown in that one study to dramatically decrease the amount of glutathione. If there was any system that we need more than anything else, it's glutathione to get rid of a lot of these toxins. Unfortunately, a lot of the toxins actually damage our ability to make glutathione. Right? Every time we get rid of a toxin, say mercury, we have to combine it to glutathione to excrete it. So we're losing our glutathione. It's more toxins we produce. Also, a lot of these toxins interfere with the production, and I think we may look at that later on. We're affecting mitochondria. Mitochondria, if we don't have the energy, cellular energy from the mitochondria, we cannot produce the energy we need to clean house. Right? It's like being too tired to clean the house, and the things get more toxic, and we get further and further behind. All right, so that is your number 6 out of 7. Hopefully after that next year we won't have styrofoam at an IAOMT meeting. The last of the plastics is bisphenol A. Bisphenol A was actually produced originally as an estrogen component. That they were looking to have another chemical that acted like estrogen, but unfortunately it turned out to be so toxic that they took it off the pharmaceutical list and put it away on a shelf. A researcher dropped it off the shelf into some plastic, and when the plastic cooled, it formed this really hard, dense mass. So, oh, this is interesting. We could make hard plastic out of this. So it became a hardening agent for things like those Nalgene water bottles. It leaches from the bottle, every one of them. It's used to protect. We don't want to have tin coming into our bodies from tin cans, so we painted bisphenol A containing plastic resin around the inside of the can so that we don't get the tin. We get the bisphenol A. And it's found in most of the canned products. Actually, the highest levels in this study, this is, again, the Environmental Working Group, was found in kid-friendly things like chicken soup, ravioli, and infant formula. A lot of the baby bottles, most of the baby bottles are hardened with bisphenol A. Born Free was the one that took it out first. Actually, when kids are younger, the ability to get rid of estrogen. Now, our body makes these hormones, and we don't want to keep them every time we make it. We don't want to keep it building up. So we bring it to the liver, and we do various things to it. And part of the way we get rid of estrogens and estrogenic components is to add a glucuronide molecule onto it, and it goes out in the bile and gets discharged. That ability to glucuronidate substances is very weak in the newborns. So for the first few months, kids that are exposed to bisphenol A being an estrogen-like component, will build up a much higher level. And in fact, it's found 11-fold higher in those 2 to 3 month olds, and it goes down as they get a little bit older. And again, it's affecting estrogen, thyroid, increased in breast cancer, testicles, diabetes. This is an interesting story about diabetes. This was a study done with lab rats that were exposed to bisphenol A, and they found that the babies born from bisphenol A fed moms grew up much fatter, had basically insulin resistance syndrome. They had cardiovascular disease, diabetes, they were plump and unhealthy. Their babies were also plump and unhealthy, and the babies of their babies were plump and unhealthy. This is one of those substances that caused a epigenetic change in the gene pool such that it was passed on from generation to generation to generation. It's found in essentially all of our urine at levels high enough to cause harm, known to cause harm, at least in lab animals. And this is in this group 7. Now, not everything in group 7 is considered everything else. So much of it is bisphenol A containing, but some of it is not. So if there's a takeaway message from this initial part, it's really get rid of plastics. We really don't need them. There are alternatives, and we'll talk about that. A lot of those plastics, a lot of the other chemicals we see, the pesticides that we'll get to later on, are estrogen receptor mimetics. They will attach to the estrogen receptors and stimulate them. And this was a fascinating study that showed the mitochondria, these really important energy factories, are affected by things that affect estrogen receptors. So the things that are blocking the estrogen receptors are blocking our estrogen, our mitochondrial function. Some of those things that we've talked about that affect the estrogen receptors, listed there, the plastic products, the brominated flame retardants that we'll talk about, pesticides, a lot of the toxic metals. So, choices. And if all I was going to talk about was how miserable the world was, then I would leave now, go outside in the sun and relax and get some enjoyment. Just don't breathe in while you're outside. But I've spent the last 5 or 6 years, maybe longer, in developing a resource guide that helps people identify where these exposures are coming from, but more importantly, where to get alternative options. Right? So it's simply, instead of the plastic, we can buy our things in glass, and almost all of your juices, all of your products that you could buy there, you have a choice between getting your orange juice or grapefruit juice in a plastic container or in the wax container or in a glass container. Choose the glass or the wax. Buy meats in wax paper or freezer wrap. Think about taking a piece of meat that has fat absorption and putting on a piece of styrofoam, wrapping it up with plastic wrap. So we're getting styrene monomers, we're getting polyvinyl chloride into this piece of meat that we're then going to cook. Meat comes to the grocery stores as bulk, and they wrap it there. All you got to do is ask them to put this in freezer wrap or put it into wax paper instead. And if they don't have it, just go down the aisle, buy some wax paper, and tell them, here, put it in here. All right? And that's before they wrap it. Never microwave in plastic. Never. Anything. Never microwave, maybe, but certainly not anything in plastic. Anybody know what microwave safe means? Throw it away, yeah. Microwave safe means that the container won't be damaged in the microwave. And store food in glass or Pyrex containers. You can get glass containers that go into your freezer. If you want to get your meats come home in the wax paper, you want to put that into a Ziploc bag, that's fine. But let's keep the plastic away from our food. And when you go out in the car or to the office, bring your own mug with you. There's no reason for us to be even increasing the amount of pollution in our environment, the landfills. Just carry along with you. There are some brands that are coming out now that are using other agents other than BPA, and I think Camelback was one of the first that I became aware of that uses this new substance, this Eastman Titan copolyester, which so far looks like it's safe. It doesn't have any of the hormone-disrupting chemicals being leached out of it, and it seems to be testing well with everything I've seen. Some of the products like Vitamix and what's the container for your water from the tap? Brita, yeah, uses a non-BPA plastic. In the resource guide, which you can get from my website, and this was no handouts, but my website is easily accessible through the information on the slide. Just go to educational material, click down to the resource guide. It's updated every few months. Right now it's 5 pages full of great information, and it's much better to download it because it's all active links, and it will get you right to the page that you're looking for, and you won't have to go to a website and then search around to find out what you're looking to resource. This is a smart plastics guide, which gives you information on the different plastics, what the type, what the 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. mean. We said that before. There is no smart plastic, but we are producing at least 380 billion plastic bags per year in this country. Very, very few of those are ever being reused, and those 380 billion bags require 16.3 billion gallons of oil to produce. Other estimates say there's about 1 trillion bags. So we're up to about 45, 50 billion gallons of oil just for those plastic bags that we're throwing out. So step 2 is those canvas containers that they're handing out here. Take it with you. Go shopping with those. If you go to the clothing stores, bring it into the clothing stores with you. Right? There's really no reason to be using all these plastic bags that we are filling our landfill with. We're using 60,000 plastic bags every 5 seconds in this country. Now that's not what 60,000 bags looks like. And that's not what 60,000 bags looks like. That is 60,000 bags every 5 seconds in this country alone. Right? We could do better than that. In perspective, now this is a San Francisco market, and the guy is yelling at her saying, "That's illegal." She's got a plastic bag full of all these things. And she's saying, what? The nicotine, alcohol, caffeine, aspartame, acrylamides, cancer-causing additives? No, just the plastic bag. The other stuff's fine. So yeah, we got to keep ourselves in perspective. Teflon is another big source. Does anybody here have Teflon home still? Just one that'll admit to it too? All right, so on Monday when you go home, the first thing you want to do is throw out your Teflon. Teflon is a known carcinogen, no question about it. And little of it leaches when you first buy the pan, but once you wash the pan one time, you cause little scratches in the surface, and it begins to leach. The more you touch it, the more you scratch it, the more it leaches out. It again affects thyroid, immune system functions, and it's found in almost everybody, and it doesn't degrade, so it's going to be in your body for a very, very long time. Those little, we mentioned the meat on the styrofoam with the vinyl top of it, the little pads in the middle of it, those are PAPs. They are there to absorb liquid so they don't leach through, but that material is converted to the toxic stuff in Teflon inside the body. So that rounds out the packaging for our meat when we go to the store. Right? Everyone's going to go to wax paper when they go home? Good. So there are certainly alternatives other than Teflon. Stainless steel is perfectly fine. Cast iron is fine if you don't have an iron storage problem. The ceramic titanium, the enameled porcelain is okay. I think the anodized aluminum is going to be okay. So far it looks okay on testing. There's always a concern about aluminum. And of course, you're going to microwave in firm materials. Now, there's also surfactants. So we have things that prevent stuff from sticking. Then we want to make stuff stick. So these are things that we'll put into insecticides or hairsprays, detergents, where we want it to spread out and stick on the surface. And these contain this tertiary octaphenol, which also is causing reproductive animal problems because it's a hormone disruptor. And if we're going to spray pesticides, it's going to make them stick there even longer. Right, so the purpose of this statement is not that you're going to go look for this individual chemical, but there are options where we can choose whether it's cleaning fluids, whether it is insect sprays, things to do around the house, in the yard, where you can get stuff that is biologically safe. And there's information on the resource guide that tells you how to identify what's safe, what's not safe. You can actually look up all of the ingredients in anything that you're buying. And it directs you to places where you can buy things that are known to be safe. I'm going to mention artificial turf, not because we do that at home, but a lot of our kids are going to school, and a lot of the schools are switching over to the artificial turf because it saves money, right? You don't have to fix the lawn every year. And this turf is usually made from recycled rubber tires. They will reach temperatures. I don't know if any of you have walked barefoot on this artificial turf. I play soccer and walking across the turf without my shoes on will burn your feet in the summertime. Gets up to 160 degrees, and those same surfactants we just talked about, they're in the rubber, they're being released from it, along with a bunch of other long-named chemicals, and even lead is being released from this stuff. So when it heats up, these things are going to emanate up from the surface, and our kids are out there rubbing their face in it, they're playing it, they're breathing it. Right? And besides, these surfaces are dangerous to play on. You fall on this stuff and you get hurt badly. Right? And it's just safer to run on grass, as this bull recognizes. You guys are hard to get laugh, aren't you? So these are the running of the bulls, and if he was on grass, he wouldn't be slipping there. But my question is, what's the photographer doing? You know? Especially when you see, that was somebody else. The guy sitting there thinking, this is a great picture, I gotta stay here and get the picture. I don't know, maybe I should go. Yeah, so it's safer to run on grass. Flame retardants are really vitally important. A lot of the foam that we use in our pillows and those cushions, polyurethane, is extremely flammable. It's been called, it's like gasoline. It's just that explosively flammable. So we need to do something that will stop it from burning. And what has been used is these polybrominated diphenyl ethers. What happens is the bromine is released from the ether, and it forms a cloud that protects the foam so the oxygen doesn't get through. Well, puts out the fire. It sounds like a good idea. We don't want to have our couches burst out in flame. Unfortunately, these are really toxic chemicals. They are a type of phthalate, and they're very similar in structure to PCBs, which we know are very toxic. And when either PCBs or the diphenyl ethers are burned or oxidized, they form dioxins. So I'm not sure about the wisdom of putting something in a fire or to be putting out fires that forms dioxins when we burn it. These flame retardants are used in a lot of the plastics. They're in our cell phones, and when you're talking on the phone for a long time, not only are you getting electromagnetic waves, but as the cell phone heats up, you'll be breathing in these PDBEs into your body. The padding under your carpets are kept the same way from bursting into flames. Lamp sockets, computers. When the trade towers went down, there was a huge amount of dioxins put out, which really came from the computers, all the plastics that were in the buildings. All right, are they bad? Yep, same stuff. They're disrupting thyroid function. They cross into the placenta, into the breast milk. And here again, when especially the couches are frayed where the cloth has exposure, then the foam underneath, or if the carpeting is fraying, the foam underneath becomes exposed, it dries out, it desiccates, and we get dust on the ground. And house dust is the major source of these brominated diphenyl ethers in our homes, in our lives. The kids who crawl around on the floor are being exposed much more so than the adults are. And so we're seeing a 7-fold higher level in the 5 and under year olds. For some reason it gets into the farm-raised fish and sardines, which I've always recommended as a low mercury fish, have the highest amount of PDBEs of any fish on the planet for reasons I don't know. And if you're using fish oils, very little mercury stays in fish oil. It's not fat soluble. What we're really concerned about is the PCBs and PDBEs. So when you're choosing fish oil brands, you want to choose ones that use extraction methods where they don't expose the oil to heat, they don't expose it to oxygen, so you're getting non-oxidized oils, and they use methods to remove these hydrocarbons. Simply avoid farm-raised fish, avoid farm-raised anything. Cover your torn upholstery, and the HEPA filter will pick up the dust, and that's one of the major areas where you want to use HEPA filters. One of the reasons you want to use them is to get rid of these particles that are too small to get picked up. When you just regular vacuum your house, you're going to blow the stuff up in the air so we get to breathe it. This is the only chemistry you're going to look at, and just the physical structure of the diphenyl ether, the PCB, and how they just oxygenate either one of them and you get dioxin. So perchlorates are another common environmental toxin. We don't have a whole lot that we can do to change our exposure to that. Government regulation is wanting at the moment. These perchlorates are being released from rocket fuel. It tends to get into our water supplies in many states, many communities, and so far the government has been want to regulate that in any effective way. The organochlorine pesticides that we'll talk about, the PDBEs, the stain repellents, all are thyroid disruptors. We talked about all of this stuff. Anybody know what polychloroethylene is? Right. This is perc. This is what is in your dry cleaners. This is why they tell you to remove the plastic bag before you bring it into the house, air it outside for a few hours before you bring your clothing into the house. This stuff is neurotoxic, it's carcinogenic, it causes a whole host of problems. And there are choices. Now, there are alternative ways of cleaning your clothes. I go to a cleaner's that uses a silicone method. The CO2 method is equally good. I can tell you that my clothes last longer, smell better, feel better. That you don't damage your clothes as much as you do with the perc. They're hard to find. Those are some quick websites to try to find areas by you. And again, that's on the resource guide. Wow, I'm out of time. So this was supposed to be our break.